When Marcus Hale stumbled through the north entrance checkpoint of Yellowstone National Park on a cold October evening in 2024, the gate officer didn't recognize him as human at first. Barefoot. Emaciated. A beard reaching his chest like something from a survival nightmare. Draped in a torn, filthy blanket instead of the ranger uniform he'd worn 6 years earlier. The man standing before them was a ghost. Someone everyone had mourned. Someone the park had memorialized. Someone whose name had been carved into the ranger station wall alongside others who'd given their lives to the wilderness. Marcus Hale had been dead for 6 years. Except he wasn't. But here's what made seasoned park officers go pale. Here's what made the FBI reopen a cold case within hours. Here's what turned a missing person file into one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in National Park Service history. It wasn't his appearance. It wasn't the 32% body weight he'd lost. It wasn't even the circular scars around his wrists and ankles, deep enough to tell a story no one wanted to hear. It was what he said about those 6 years. About the place where he'd been held. About the sounds of metal doors in absolute darkness. About the damp earth walls barely wide enough to stretch his arms. About the voice that came through a narrow slot at feeding time, always the same, always controlled, always reminding him that no one was looking anymore. And about what still exists beneath Yellowstone, hidden under feet of compacted soil and pine needles, in places where thermal drones can't reach and search teams never thought to look. Before we go deeper into what happened to Marcus Hale, and what investigators found when they finally believed his story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what you're about to hear isn't just about one man's survival. It's about how someone can disappear in broad daylight from one of the most monitored wilderness areas in America. It's about how a single person, living off the grid with nothing but hand tools and patience, can construct an invisible prison that holds a man for over 2,000 days. And it's about the underground world that searchers walked right over in 2018, never knowing that Marcus was 20 feet below them, bound to a wall, listening to their footsteps fade into the distance. This is the story of Ranger Marcus Hale. The 6 years he spent buried alive. And the man who put him there. At exactly 2:05 p.m. on August 29, 2018, Marcus Hale signed out of the Beckler station duty log, his handwriting steady and unremarkable in the column reserved for solo backcountry patrols. The entry read, Geothermal Survey, Beckler Canyon, Western Trail Branch to Mr. Bubble's Hot Ring Complex. Expected return 1900 hours. 34 years old. 9 years of experience in Yellowstone's most isolated sectors. A reputation among his colleagues for being methodical, cautious, and frankly, a bit boring in the best possible way. Marcus was the kind of ranger who triple-checked his equipment, who radioed in even when nothing was happening, who never took shortcuts through unmarked terrain. The kind of ranger who doesn't just vanish. That afternoon, the Beckler Canyon area was wrapped in the thick golden silence that only late summer in Yellowstone can produce. The tourist crowds had thinned. The morning rain had left the forest floor damp and springy, releasing the deep earth smell of rotting pine needles and volcanic soil. Marcus carried standard gear, a two-way radio clipped to his chest, a USGS topographic map in a waterproof case, geological temperature measuring devices for monitoring the hot springs, 72 hours of emergency rations, a first aid kit, water purification tablets, and a compass that had belonged to his father. He was dressed in the standard Park Service uniform, green and gray, with heavy-duty boots that left a distinctive tread pattern in soft ground. On his belt, a multi-tool bear spray, and a small notebook where he logged observations in cramped, efficient handwriting. The plan was simple. Follow the Western Trail Branch through approximately 3 miles of dense lodgepole pine forest. Descend into the canyon where Beckler River cut through ancient volcanic rock. Survey the geothermal features that had shown unusual activity after the heavy rainfall 2 days prior, and return before sunset. Simple. Routine. Safe. At 4:12 p.m., Marcus radioed his first check-in. His voice came through clear, slightly distorted by the canyon walls but perfectly audible at Beckler Station. Beckler Base, this is Hale. Passed through the dense forest section, moving down to lower terrain now. Trail conditions good, no obstructions. Steam activity visible ahead, proceeding to survey points. The coordinator at Beckler Station, A woman named Janet Reeves, who'd worked dispatch for 16 years, logged the call with barely a second thought. Standard communication. Marcus doing exactly what Marcus always did. At 4:47 p.m., Marcus made his second and final radio transmission. Beckler base, this is Hale. A pause, slightly longer than usual. Background noise that Janet would later describe as a hollow echo, like wind moving through a narrow space. I'm at the base of the South Canyon wall. I'm seeing something unusual here. There's a light, looks artificial, flashing in a pattern. 3 short, 2 long. It's coming from the rock face, maybe 40 meters ahead. Not consistent with any research team schedule I'm aware of. Moving closer to investigate. We'll report back in 15. Janet Reeves acknowledged the transmission. Copy that, Hale. Keep channel open. Report findings. Static. Then nothing. For the next 14 minutes, Janet waited. At 5:01 p.m., she attempted to raise Marcus on the radio. No response. She switched frequencies, thinking perhaps he'd accidentally changed channels. Nothing. She tried the emergency band. Silence. At 5:15 p.m., she began calling every 3 minutes. By 5:30 p.m., her voice had taken on an edge that the other rangers in the station noticed immediately. By 6 p.m., as the sun began its descent behind the western mountains and long shadows stretched across Beckler Canyon, Janet Reeves initiated the first-level alert protocol. Marcus Hale, veteran ranger, careful to the point of paranoia, had gone completely silent in one of the most geologically unstable areas of Yellowstone National Park. What no one knew yet, what wouldn't be discovered for 6 long years, was that at approximately 4:49 p.m. on August 29, 2018, Marcus Hale had stepped off the trail to investigate that flashing light and had walked directly into a trap that had been prepared with patience, precision, and a level of calculated malice that would later make FBI behavioral analysts go quiet when reviewing the evidence. The last free steps Marcus Hale took on Earth carried him towards something that looked, at first, like a reflection off metal. Maybe a forgotten piece of survey equipment. Maybe an old hiking mirror wedged in the rocks. But as he moved closer, pushing through a thick stand of young pines, his boot sinking slightly into ground that felt oddly soft, oddly uniform, he noticed the light wasn't reflecting. It was being directed. And in the moment before everything changed, in that final second before 6 years of darkness began, Marcus Hale had just enough time to register 3 things. First, the ground beneath his feet wasn't natural. The pine needles were too evenly distributed. The soil too carefully smoothed. Second, the light ahead had stopped flashing. Someone or something had turned it off the moment he came into view. Third, behind him, very close enough that he could hear the intake of breath, there was another person in the forest. Marcus reached for his radio. He never touched it. By 7 p.m., Beckler Station had activated full emergency protocols. By 8:15 p.m., Marcus Hale's family received the phone call that every ranger family dreads. The voice on the other end was professional, careful, using words like lost contact, and precautionary measures, and no reason to believe. By 9:40 p.m., after confirming that Marcus had not appeared at any exit gate, patrol point, or neighboring ranger station within a 50-mile radius, the National Park Service officially recorded him as missing while on duty. By midnight, the first search and rescue teams were gearing up in the cold fluorescent lights of the equipment bay, their faces grim, their movements efficient. At first light on August 30th, at exactly 5:32 a.m., 3 separate SAR teams moved out into Beckler Canyon carrying everything modern search technology could provide. GPS units with topographic overlays. Wide-beam tactical flashlights that could illuminate a football field. Thermal imaging devices. First aid trauma kits. High-frequency radios with amplified range. They were looking for an experienced ranger in familiar territory. They expected to find him within hours, probably injured from a fall, maybe disoriented from hitting his head, possibly suffering from dehydration or a broken leg. They expected a rescue operation. What they walked into was something else entirely. The primary search radius focused on Marcus's planned route, a careful overlay of his last known coordinates, his intended survey points, and the area where he'd reported seeing the flashing light. The zone was divided into 3 concentric rings. Ring 1, a 1-kilometer radius around his final signal point at the base of the South Canyon Wall. Priority Alpha. Every square meter would be visually inspected. Ring 2, connecting trail branches and alternate routes Marcus might have taken if disoriented. Priority Beta. Sweep patterns with 20-meter spacing between searchers. Ring 3, expanded terrain including areas where someone injured or confused might wander. Priority Gamma. Aerial support with helicopter observation. At 7:08 a.m., the Western Trail Sweep team made the first discovery. A glove. Marcus's glove, specifically. Park Service issue, left hand, size large. It was lying beneath a thick layer of pine needles about 300 meters south of the main trail, in an area that wasn't on his planned route but wasn't impossibly far off course either. The team leader, a 20-year SAR veteran named Tom Kowalski, photographed the glove in place before collecting it as evidence. What struck him immediately was its condition. Clean. Dry. No mud, no blood, no tears. It looked like it had simply been dropped, not torn off in a struggle or lost during a fall. Bag it, Kowalski said quietly. Mark the coordinates. Expand the search pattern from this point. 6 meters from the glove, they found the footprints. 4 of them. Maybe 5, depending on how you counted the partial impression near a tree root. Boot prints that matched the standard-issue Ranger footwear Marcus had been wearing. The tread pattern was distinctive, a lug design that left clear parallel ridges in soft soil. But here's what made Tom Kowalski's stomach tighten. The prints didn't go anywhere. They appeared in a short sequence, for clear impressions showing Marcus had been walking southeast, his weight distribution normal, his gait steady. No signs of running. No indication of stumbling. And then they just stopped. Not faded. Not obscured. Stopped. As if Marcus Hale had taken 4 steps and then simply ceased to exist. Kowalski knelt beside the final print, studying the compressed soil, the way the tread pattern pressed deeper at the heel, indicating Marcus had been moving slowly, carefully. He looked ahead, scanning for any continuation of the trail. Nothing. He looked to the sides, searching for signs that Marcus had jumped or been dragged laterally. Nothing. The ground beyond the 4th print was undisturbed pine needles, a natural carpet that showed no indication of passage. Get the K9 unit over here, Kowalski said into his radio, his voice flat. And I want this entire area photographed from every angle. Something's not right. What the search team couldn't know, what they had no framework for understanding, was that they were standing directly above an underground structure. A man-made chamber, carefully excavated, precisely reinforced, deliberately concealed under 3 feet of compacted soil and a perfectly reconstructed layer of forest floor. And inside that chamber, 23 feet below their boots, Marcus Hale was beginning to wake up with a splitting headache, his hands bound behind his back with plastic zip ties, his mouth sealed with duct tape, lying on a floor that smelled of damp earth and something chemical he couldn't quite identify. Above ground, the search continued. Tom Kowalski's team established the glove and footprints as ground zero for the search, radiating outward in careful sweeps. They found nothing else. No broken branches indicating someone had pushed through the underbrush. No disturbed areas suggesting a struggle. No blood. No torn fabric. No dropped equipment. The absence of evidence was, in itself, deeply disturbing. At 9 a.m., the K9 unit arrived. 2 German Shepherds, both certified in wilderness search and rescue, both with success rates that made them legends among the Yellowstone SAR community. The first dog, a 7-year-old male named Atlas, immediately picked up Marcus's scent from the glove. His handler, a compact woman named Sarah Chun, let out the lead and followed as Atlas began tracking. The dog moved confidently toward the footprint site, circling the area twice, his nose working the ground with systematic precision. Then he moved southeast, following what appeared to be a scent trail that matched the direction of the boot prints. Atlas tracked for approximately 40 meters, moving steadily through the pine forest, never hesitating, never doubling back. Sarah Chun felt a surge of hope. The dog had something. Then, abruptly, Atlas stopped. He circled a small area near a rocky outcropping, whining softly, clearly confused. His behavior indicated the scent was present but directionless, as if Marcus had simply evaporated at that exact spot. "What is it, boy?" Sarah knelt beside the dog, running her hand through his fur. "Where'd he go?" Atlas sat, looked up at her, and whined again. The sound a search dog makes when it knows the scent is there but can't follow it. Sarah Chun had been doing this for 11 years. She'd seen dogs lose scent at river crossings, in heavy rain, when a subject climbed into a vehicle. But this was different. The weather was clear. There was no water. And the scent hadn't faded, it had simply vanished at a specific point in the middle of the forest. She looked at Tom Kowalski, who'd walked over to observe. "This doesn't make sense. It's like he went underground." The words hung in the air between them. Neither of them smiled at the unintended accuracy of that statement. By noon, the search had expanded to include thermal drone coverage. The quadcopter lifted off from a clearing west of the search zone, its infrared camera capable of detecting human body heat through moderate tree canopy coverage. The operator, a Park Service tech specialist named David Ortiz, flew the drone in overlapping grid patterns, watching the thermal display for any hot spots that might indicate a human presence. The screen showed the expected signatures: scattered patches of steam from small geothermal vents, the cooling earth where sunlight penetrated the forest canopy, small animals moving through the underbrush, and the search team members themselves, bright white-yellow figures on the infrared display. But no Marcus Hale. David flew lower, pushing the thermal camera's capabilities, scanning the exact areas where the footprints and glove had been found. Nothing. No heat signature that resembled a human body, alive or dead. At 2:30 p.m., a Park Service helicopter from West Yellowstone arrived, equipped with high-resolution cameras and an experienced air search crew. For the next 3 hours, they flew systematic patterns over Beckler Canyon, photographing every visible feature, comparing real-time imagery with topographic maps, searching for any anomaly. The crew spotted a family of elk. A black bear moving along Beckler River. Several thermal features that matched known hot springs. But no sign of Marcus Hale. By late afternoon, weather began to deteriorate. Wind picked up from the west, carrying hot steam from the Mr. Bubbles complex, creating visibility problems. Low clouds rolled into the canyon, wrapping around the rock faces like fog, making helicopter operations increasingly dangerous. At 5:47 p.m., the helicopter crew was forced to return to base, leaving the ground teams to continue the search on foot. As sunset approached on the first full day of searching, SAR coordinator Janet Reeves assembled her team leaders for a status briefing. They gathered in the cramped operations room at Beckler Station, the walls covered with maps now annotated with colored markers indicating search sectors, discovered evidence, and cleared zones. The room smelled of coffee, sweat, and the particular kind of tension that comes when experienced professionals encounter something they don't understand. Janet stood at the front of the room, her face drawn, exhaustion evident in the way she held her shoulders. "Talk to me. What do we have?" Tom Kowalski spoke first. "1 glove, 4 boot prints, an AK-9 scent track that terminates in the middle of nowhere. No blood, no signs of struggle, no indication of wildlife activity. The site is clean. Too clean." "Thermal?" Janet asked. David Ortiz shook his head. "Nothing. If he's in that search zone, he's either deep underground or—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Helicopter. Weather forced us back. But we covered 70% of the primary zone. No visual contact." Janet turned to Sarah Chun. "Your K9s are telling us something. What's your read?" Sarah chose her words carefully. Atlas and Luna both tracked to the same termination point. The scent is present, but not continuing. In 11 years, I've never seen this behavior unless the subject was picked up by vehicle or went into water. There's no road access in that area, and Beckler River is 200 meters away. The room went quiet. Finally, one of the junior rangers, a young man named Chris Martinez, spoke up. "What if he fell into something? A sinkhole, maybe? Or one of those hidden thermal features that aren't on the maps?" It was the most logical explanation anyone had offered. Janet nodded slowly. Thermal features. Ground collapse. It fits the terrain. She turned to the geological specialist who'd been sitting quietly in the corner. Dr. Hammond, what's the likelihood? Dr. Elizabeth Hammond, a USGS geologist who'd been consulting with Yellowstone for 15 years, stood and approached the map. She pointed to the area where the glove and footprints had been found. This zone sits on the edge of the Beckler geothermal system, she said. Historically unstable. We've documented ground subsidence events here dating back to the 1950s. Hot water moving through fractured rock can create voids, weaknesses in the overlying soil. If Ranger Hale stepped on compromised ground, it's possible he could have broken through into a thermal cavity. Would we be able to detect that? Tom asked. Dr. Hammond hesitated. Maybe. But if the cavity filled with hot water immediately after the collapse, or if it's deep enough and the opening sealed itself with falling debris, thermal imaging might not pick it up. The ambient heat from the geothermal system could mask a body's heat signature. Janet felt something cold settle in her chest. So we might be looking for him in the wrong place. He could be 20 feet underground. It's possible, Dr. Hammond said quietly. The briefing concluded with a plan for the next day: expanded ground-penetrating radar scans of the geothermal areas, additional K-9 sweeps in concentric circles around the termination point, and continued aerial coverage if weather permitted. But everyone in that room felt it. The silent understanding that with each passing hour, the chances of finding Marcus Hale alive were dropping exponentially. What none of them knew, what wouldn't be discovered until 6 years later when forensic investigators reconstructed that afternoon in August 2018, was that Marcus Hale had indeed gone underground. But not the way Dr. Hammond theorized. There was no thermal collapse. No hidden sinkhole. No accident of geology. Marcus had gone underground because someone put him there. Someone who'd been watching the trail for weeks. Someone who'd studied ranger patrol schedules, learned their radio check-in patterns, understood their search protocols. Someone who'd dug a chamber 23 feet below the forest floor, reinforced it with hand-cut timber and stolen cement, equipped it with a ventilation pipe barely thicker than a man's wrist, and furnished it with steel hooks bolted into wooden beams at exactly the height needed to restrain a standing man's wrists. Someone who'd covered the entrance hatch so perfectly with compacted soil and redistributed pine needles that trained K-9s could smell Marcus's scent in the air above it, but couldn't follow the trail down. Someone who, at that exact moment, while search teams discussed thermal cavities and ground collapse, was standing in the darkness of that underground chamber, watching Marcus Hale slowly regain consciousness, watching him realize his hands were bound and his mouth was taped and he was somewhere without light, without sound, without any hope of being heard. Someone who would keep Marcus in that darkness for 2,190 days. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need to understand how thoroughly Marcus Hale vanished, how completely the search failed, and how a man could be buried alive less than a quarter mile from one of America's most visited national parks without anyone knowing he was there. Over the next 3 days, the search for Marcus Hale became one of the most intensive SAR operations Yellowstone had mounted in a decade. Additional teams arrived from neighboring parks. Volunteers with wilderness experience drove in from Montana and Idaho. The operation swelled to 43 personnel on the ground, supported by helicopter crews, thermal imaging specialists, and geological consultants. They swept the secondary forest branches where the terrain steepened into root-matted slopes that could erase footprints. They probed every deep pool in Beckler River with long poles, searching rock crevices and undercut roots exposed by the recent rain. They rappelled down the South Canyon wall using safety ropes, examining every ledge where someone could slip and fall. Every sector came back negative. No fresh landslides. No fall marks on the cliff faces. No fractured rocks indicating recent foot traffic. No body snagged in the river. No scent trail leading anywhere that made sense. The thermal drone flew pattern after pattern, its sensors scanning for human heat signatures. The data came back showing only steam patches from hot springs, scattered geothermal vents, and the search teams themselves moving through the grid. No Marcus. By day 4, the weather turned. Wind strengthened from the west, carrying dense fog patches that restricted visibility to less than 30 meters in some areas. Rain made the rock faces slick and dangerous. Temperatures dropped, requiring teams to narrow their operations for safety. By day 7, after resweeping every high-probability area multiple times without discovering a single additional clue beyond the glove and 4 boot prints, the search coordinator made the decision no one wanted to make. At 1,600 hours on September 5, 2018, the active search was suspended. The case file was updated with a provisional conclusion that Ranger Marcus Hale had most likely suffered a terrain accident while approaching the canyon base, possibly falling into a rock crevice or a thermal feature where detection would be obstructed by steam and high background heat. It was the only explanation that fit the evidence, or rather, the profound absence of evidence. Marcus Hale's name was added to the list of Park Service personnel who'd given their lives in service. A memorial was held. His family buried an empty casket. The file was moved to cold case status. And beneath the forest floor, in a chamber so carefully constructed that its ventilation pipe was camouflaged as a natural rock crevice, Marcus Hale learned what it meant to be forgotten by the world above. October 17, 2024. 6 years, 1 month, and 18 days after Marcus Hale vanished into Beckler Canyon. The evening shift at the Roosevelt Arch entrance to Yellowstone was winding down when a gate attendant named Kevin Marsh noticed something moving near the tree line. At first, he thought it was a bear. The shape was hunched, moving with an awkward shuffling gait that didn't look quite human. Then it stepped into the parking lot lights. Kevin would later tell investigators that his first thought was that someone was playing an elaborate prank. The figure approaching the checkpoint looked like something from a survival reality show, the kind where contestants are left in the wilderness for 40 days and emerge looking like cavemen. Except this was worse. The man was barefoot, his feet blackened with dirt and old scars. He wore what might have once been pants, now little more than tattered strips of fabric held together by filth. His torso was covered with a torn blanket that reeked of mildew and human waste. His hair hung in matted ropes past his shoulders. His beard reached his chest, tangled with debris. But it was his body that made Kevin reach for his radio with shaking hands. The man was skeletal. Ribs visible through skin that had the pale, translucent quality of something that hadn't seen sunlight in years. His arms were stick-thin, muscles completely atrophied. He moved like every step caused pain, like someone who'd forgotten how to walk properly. "Sir." Kevin called out, his voice cracking. "Sir, do you need help?" The man's head lifted slowly, as if the effort of raising it was almost too much. His eyes took a long moment to focus on Kevin's face. When he spoke, his voice was a dry rasp, barely audible. "My name is Marcus Hale. I'm a park ranger. I need help." Kevin stared at him. The name meant nothing at first. Just another desperate person needing assistance. He reached for the phone to call for medical support and local sheriff's deputies. Then the name clicked. Marcus Hale. The ranger who'd disappeared 6 years ago. The one with a memorial plaque at Beckler Station. The cold case file that every ranger in the park knew about because it represented their worst nightmare, vanishing without a trace while on duty. "That's not possible," Kevin said, more to himself than to the man swaying on his feet in front of him. "Marcus Hale is dead." "I'm not dead." The words came out with a strange, flat certainty. "I was underground. He kept me underground." Then Marcus Hale's legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the pavement. Within 8 minutes, Park County Sheriff's deputies and emergency medical personnel arrived at Roosevelt Arch. Within 20 minutes, someone had pulled the old missing person file and was comparing the description to the man now being loaded into an ambulance. Within an hour, the first fingerprint match came back. The man who'd appeared at the gate, the emaciated figure who looked like he'd walked out of a nightmare, was definitively, impossibly, Marcus Hale. The ranger who'd been dead and buried for 6 years had just walked out of Yellowstone's wilderness. And what he said about where he'd been, about what had happened to him, would force investigators to reopen a case they'd closed as an accident and confront the possibility that something far worse had been hiding in America's oldest national park. The medical examination began at 2,218 hours at the county hospital in Gardiner. What the doctors found in those first hours would later become crucial evidence in a federal criminal investigation. Marcus Hale weighed 142 pounds. 6 years earlier, his personnel health exam had recorded him at 209 pounds. He'd lost 32% of his body weight. His body fat percentage was at the minimum level required to sustain life. His skin was dry and flaking in patches, indicating prolonged vitamin A and D deficiency. His nails were brittle with clear horizontal ridges, markers of severe malnutrition sustained over years, not weeks or months. These ridges formed in layers, visible proof of cyclical starvation. But the weight loss wasn't the most disturbing finding. The X-rays told a different story. A story of prolonged captivity. Marcus's left wrist showed evidence of an old fracture that had healed without proper treatment. The bone had knitted back together at a slight angle, with abnormally thick callus formation. The kind of healing that happens when a fracture is immobilized crudely or not at all, when someone breaks their wrist and has no access to medical care, no splint, no pain medication, just time and the body's desperate attempt to repair itself. His right 8th and 9th ribs showed similar signs. Old fractures, healed off-axis. Not the clean breaks of a single traumatic event, but the pattern of repeated impact or multiple falls without treatment. His lumbar spine showed abnormal curvature. The vertebrae had adapted to maintaining a hunched sitting or side-lying posture for an extended period. His back had literally reshaped itself to accommodate being confined in a space too small for normal movement. The muscle atrophy was severe and specific. His quadriceps and calf muscles, the weight-bearing muscle groups, were almost completely wasted. His thigh circumference had decreased by nearly half compared to his pre-disappearance measurements. This wasn't the muscle loss of someone who'd been injured and bedridden. This was the systematic deterioration that comes from being unable to stand, walk, or use your legs naturally for years. On his skin, doctors cataloged scars of varying ages. 4 to 6 centimeter cuts on his forearms and calves, clean-edged, consistent with injuries from metal objects or sharp cutting tools. Coin-sized dark patches on his right forearm and left ankle, the surface texture indicating low temperature but prolonged burns. The kind caused by accidental contact with heat sources like gas lamps or hot metal surfaces in an enclosed space. Around his wrists and ankles were faint but unmistakable circular scars. Not the marks of rope. These were the scars left by rigid restraints, metal or hard plastic, worn long enough to damage the skin and form permanent marks. Not hours. Not days. Months. Years. The distribution pattern was methodical. Both wrists, both ankles, suggesting he'd been restrained in a standing or seated position repeatedly, systematically, over an extended period. Dr. Sarah Yamamoto, the forensic physician who conducted the examination, had worked cases involving human trafficking victims, hostage situations, and long-term abuse. She recognized what she was looking at. This man, she dictated into her recorder, her voice carefully controlled, shows physical evidence consistent with prolonged confinement in a restricted space with limited movement, inadequate nutrition, lack of natural light, and repeated physical restraint. The pattern of injuries could not have formed if the subject had survived independently in wilderness conditions. These injuries are consistent with captivity. When Park Service investigators received Dr. Yamamoto's preliminary report at 0340 hours on October 18, the Marcus Hale case was immediately reclassified. This was no longer a missing person file. This was a federal kidnapping investigation. The psychological evaluation began carefully, gently. Marcus Hale had endured trauma that most people couldn't comprehend. The clinical psychology team knew that pushing too hard, too fast, could cause him to shut down completely or fragment what memories he had managed to retain. Dr. James Chun, a specialist in treating victims of long-term captivity, conducted the initial sessions. Marcus couldn't maintain eye contact for more than a few seconds. He continually scanned the corners of the hospital room. When the door opened unexpectedly or when footsteps approached in the hallway, his entire body tensed, hands gripping the bed rails with white-knuckled intensity. When medical staff accidentally touched his wrists or ankles during examinations, Marcus experienced brief panic episodes, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow, his eyes losing focus. Dr. Chen noted that Marcus's memories were fragmented, out of chronological order, appearing in pieces rather than coherent sequences. When asked to describe the overall events of his captivity, Marcus would stop mid-sentence, request breaks, or show signs of acute stress. So Dr. Chen changed tactics. Instead of asking Marcus to tell the whole story, he asked about specific, concrete details. Small things. Sensory information. The kind of memories that might be preserved even when narrative memory was damaged. "Tell me about the light," Dr. Chen said during their third session. "Where you were held. Describe the light." Marcus closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. There wasn't any. Not natural light. It was always dark unless he turned on the lamp. Small lamp. Weak. Maybe gas-powered, I don't know. It had a smell. Chemical. He'd light it when he brought food. Then turn it off again. Most of the time, it was completely dark. How did you know if it was day or night? I didn't. Not really. I tried to count the times he came. 2 times for food, usually. I think. But I lost track. Time stopped meaning anything. What about sounds? What did you hear? Marcus's breathing changed, becoming shallower. Metal. The sound of metal. A lock, I think. Heavy. Then footsteps. Slow. He never rushed. And his voice. Deep. A little hoarse. Like he'd smoked for years. Did he speak to you often? No. Just instructions. Stand up. Sit down. Eat. That's all. He never explained anything. Never said why. Over multiple sessions, Dr. Chen pieced together fragments of Marcus's experience. The cell was small. Marcus estimated he couldn't fully extend his legs while lying down. The ceiling was low enough that when he stood straight, he could feel the surface above his head. The walls smelled of damp earth and metal. The floor was not completely level, and sometimes he could hear water dripping somewhere below, a sound that became the metronome of his captivity. The door was thick metal with a narrow horizontal slot at eye level. The slot would open at feeding times. Food would be pushed through. The slot would close. The lock would engage with that same heavy final sound. Marcus described being restrained. Steel hooks on the wall at shoulder height. His wrists bound to these hooks, forcing him to stand or slump forward for hours at a time. When he was allowed to sit, there was a chain attached to his ankle, long enough to reach a corner of the cell but not long enough to reach the door. I tried to break it, Marcus said, his voice distant. The chain. The first few days, I pulled on it until my ankle bled. But it was solid. Everything was solid. The walls, the door, the hooks. Everything was built to hold. Dr. Chen asked about the transfer between locations. Marcus had mentioned being in 2 different spaces. It was sudden, Marcus said. I don't know how long I was in the first place. Months, maybe. Time was already broken by then. One day the door opened, but he didn't bring food. He had something over his face. A mask, I think. And he had. I don't remember clearly. A cloth. With a smell. Chemical. Strong. Everything went black. And when you woke up? Different space. Bigger. I could lie down all the way. The ceiling was higher. There was a wall wood, with a gap at the bottom. I could hear water more clearly. It sounded close. And the air moved differently. Like there was a breeze coming from somewhere. This matched what investigators would later discover. 2 underground chambers, connected by a narrow passage. The second larger, more developed, suggesting the captor had spent years improving his infrastructure. Marcus described the daily cycle in the second location. The same metal lock sound. The same slow footsteps. The same deep voice giving minimal instructions. But there were subtle differences. Sometimes he could hear other sounds. Distant. Like the captor was working on something in another space beyond the wooden partition. What kind of sounds? Hammering. Metal on metal. Sometimes sawing. Wood, I think. He was building something or fixing something. And sometimes I'd hear him talking. Not to me. To himself. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like he was working something out. Planning. When Dr. Chun asked if Marcus ever saw his captor's face, Marcus shook his head. Only shadows. When the lamp was on, he stayed in the doorway. Outside the light. The few times I saw him clearly, he had his face covered. Cloth wrapped around. I remember his hands, though. Old hands. Rough. Like someone who'd worked with them his whole life. The psychological team compiled these fragments into a preliminary report. Marcus Hale had been held in conditions of extreme sensory deprivation, physical restraint, and deliberate isolation. The captivity showed signs of being methodical and sustained over years, not improvised or short-term. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was something planned, constructed, and maintained with disturbing patience. At 8 o'clock hours on October 19, 2024, the full investigative apparatus of the federal government descended on the Marcus Hale case. The FBI's Violent Crimes Against Children Division took lead, though Marcus was an adult. The designation came from the severity of the captivity and the need for specialized resources. Park Service investigators joined them. USGS geologists were brought in to analyze terrain. Behavioral analysts from Quantico began building a profile. The first step was reconstructing what had happened in August 2018. Every piece of data from the original search was pulled from archives. Radio logs. Camera trap footage. SAW reports. Satellite imagery. Weather data. Everything. The radio logs were re-examined with new filtering technology. Analysis revealed that Marcus's signal had experienced 2 instances of heavy interference before his final transmission, occurring minutes earlier than the coordinator had originally noted. The dead zone hadn't started at 1647. It had started at approximately 1638. This was significant. It meant Marcus had been near something that interfered with radio signals for nearly 10 minutes before he went silent. Something metal. Something enclosed. The camera trap footage from 1.8 miles north of where the glove was found was processed with new contrast enhancement algorithms. In the original 2018 review, the footage showed Marcus passing through at 1427, then nothing else. But with enhanced processing, something appeared. A faint human silhouette, standing motionless at the edge of the frame approximately 22 minutes after Marcus passed. The figure was upright, similar height to Marcus, but completely still across 3 consecutive frames. This was never noted in the original SAR report. It had been too faint, too ambiguous. But now, cross-referenced with Marcus's description of being watched, of someone being behind him in the forest, it became critical evidence. Satellite images from August 28 to 30, 2018, were reprocessed. Low resolution in 2018, but modern enhancement revealed something the original investigators had missed. A dark semicircular patch of soil just off Marcus's planned trail, most visible in early morning images on August 29. At the time, it had been dismissed as temporary discoloration from heavy rain. But when cross-referenced with Marcus's description of warm flooring and water dripping below, the analysis team reassessed it as possible evidence of a subsurface structure beneath the soil layer. The old SAR teams hadn't searched that area because it was outside their priority range. It was off-trail. It showed no obvious signs of disturbance. It had been overlooked. The geology team was tasked with determining if a man-made underground structure could exist in that location without being detected. Dr. Elizabeth Hammond, who'd consulted on the original search, reviewed the data with fresh eyes and a new hypothesis. The soil in this area is deep and compacted, she explained to the investigative team. Someone with knowledge of basic geology could excavate a chamber without risking collapse. The location is just outside the geothermal active zone, so you wouldn't have thermal detection issues. And if they installed proper ventilation and used the natural sound dampening of Earth, you could have someone screaming for help 20 feet below the surface and nobody would hear them from above. Could someone build this alone? With time, yes. With hand tools and patience. It would take months, maybe a year to do it properly. But it's absolutely feasible. The Behavioral Analysis Unit began constructing a profile of who could do this. Someone with wilderness living experience. Someone familiar with Yellowstone's terrain and ranger patrol patterns. Someone with basic construction skills and access to materials. Someone who valued control, isolation, and methodical planning over impulsive violence. Someone who'd been preparing for this long before Marcus Hale walked down that trail in August 2018. The profile pointed toward a specific type, an off-grid individual, middle-aged or older, with a history of unauthorized construction or conflicts with authorities, someone who'd lived on the fringes of society long enough to be functionally invisible. And somewhere in the archives of citations, warnings, and minor incidents around Yellowstone over the past 2 decades, that person's name was waiting to be found. While behavioral analysts built their profile and investigators combed through old records, the forensic team focused on something Marcus had carried out of his captivity without knowing it. The dirt on his clothes. Every piece of clothing Marcus wore when he appeared at Roosevelt Arch was carefully removed, documented, and sent to the FBI laboratory in Quantico. Soil samples were extracted from his pant leg cuffs, the crevices in his shoe soles, his sleeve edges, and the folds of his torn jacket. Each sample was processed using particle separation methods and analyzed via electron microscopy combined with infrared spectroscopy to identify chemical composition. What they found changed everything. The samples contained microcrystalline limestone particles, kaolinite-rich clay, and a significant amount of hydrated cement dust. Components that were completely incompatible with the natural geology of the Yellowstone area. Dr. Patricia Moreno, the FBI's senior geological forensic specialist, delivered her findings to the investigative team on October 23. The geological strata around Beckler Canyon consists primarily of rhyolite rock, volcanic sediments, and silicic ash, she explained, pulling up comparison slides on the conference room screen. There is no natural occurrence of limestone in this area. None. The presence of limestone and cement on Marcus Hale's clothing means only one thing: he was in an environment with artificial construction materials. Could these minerals have transferred from somewhere else? One of the FBI agents asked. Maybe he walked through an area with old construction debris? Dr. Moreno shook her head. The distribution is wrong for surface transfer. We found these particles embedded deep in the fabric fibers, ground into the material through prolonged contact. And the hydration state of the cement indicates it's been in a damp, enclosed environment for years. This isn't debris he walked past. This is material he lived on, sat on, slept on for an extended period. She pulled up the next slide, showing microscopic images of the particles. Based on the mineral composition and particle size distribution, I can tell you that the cement came from a hand-mixed batch, not commercially poured. You can see the inconsistency in the aggregate size, the varying hydration levels. Someone mixed this by hand, probably in small batches over time. What does that tell us about the structure? The lead investigator asked. It tells us we're looking for a manually constructed underground space. A bunker, a shelter, something reinforced with walls or floors made from artificial materials. And based on the depth of particle embedding in Marcus's clothing, he was in direct, repeated contact with these surfaces for years. The forensic geology team prepared a comprehensive report concluding that Marcus Hale had been held in an artificial structure, not a natural cave or wilderness shelter. This gave the investigation team their first concrete search parameter. They needed to find a location within Yellowstone's boundaries where someone could have constructed an underground bunker using limestone and cement without being detected. The geological analysis team expanded their scope to 3D geological data of Yellowstone and surrounding areas, focusing on locations with high likelihood of containing artificial or natural voids that have been modified by humans. The geological map showed only 2 terrain types within a 10-mile radius of Beckler Canyon that could support the mineral evidence. Geothermal fractured rock blocks, where underground heat and steam activity created natural voids. Compressible soil layers in the lower southwestern forest, where the ground was thicker and drier compared to hot spring areas. But Marcus's descriptions during psychological interviews eliminated the first option. He described damp earth walls, not rock. He described warm flooring and slight floor vibration, not the distributed heat pattern of geothermal features. The sensation he described matched heat transfer from pipes or artificial water flow in a confined space, not natural thermal activity. The team focused on the southwestern forest area. They integrated all available data into a GIS mapping system: Marcus's last contact location, the glove discovery site, radio dead zone points, the human silhouette sighting in camera trap footage, geological zones that were easily excavatable, and the mineral data from his clothing. When they overlaid the artificial mineral layer on the map, only one area intersected all the data points. A sparse forest section southwest of Beckler Canyon. Deep soil. Stable moisture levels. Not part of the active hot spring zone but close to minor geological faults that could facilitate subsurface construction without exposure from surface temperature changes. This area had not been accessed by SAR teams in 2018 because it wasn't on any established trails and showed no clear traces leading to it. It had been invisible to the search. The investigation team deployed drone-mounted LiDAR systems to scan the area. LiDAR could penetrate vegetation and detect ground elevation changes with centimeter precision. During 3 consecutive flights along the southwestern sparse forest area, the LiDAR recorded several notable anomalies. A semicircular depressed area, approximately 4 meters wide and 25 centimeters deep compared to surrounding ground. A faint straight line extending northeast from the depression, possibly a vent pipe or shallow tunnel. When analysts examined the LiDAR return waveforms, the data showed this wasn't natural subsidence. The depression profile was too uniform. The reflectivity matched a compacted artificial surface, possibly hard material beneath the soil layer. This depressed area lay directly within the movement corridor proposed by the new timeline, near Marcus's last signal point and close to where 2018 satellite imagery had detected that darker soil patch. Cross-referencing the LiDAR map with Marcus's descriptions of echoing sounds and floor vibration, the team made their preliminary assessment. This area likely contained an artificial hollow structure. An underground bunker reinforced with materials containing limestone and cement. The linear feature crossing the surface suggested the structure had been used for an extended period and might have multiple connected chambers. On October 26, 2024, the investigation team received authorization for a controlled excavation. The excavation began at 7:20 hours on October 29, 2024. Geologists, field investigators, forensic technicians, and AK-9 units specialized in detecting voids assembled at the coordinates identified by LiDAR scanning. The area was cordoned off. Photography equipment was set up to document every stage of the dig. After clearing the thick layer of vegetation, pine needles and decayed leaves, the technical team used a metal detector for preliminary scanning. Within 40 minutes, the detector registered a strong signal beneath the soil at the depression center. When the shovel blade broke through approximately 30 centimeters down, it struck metal with a distinctive hollow sound. The kind of sound you hear when you tap a hatch or cover of an underground bunker. The team expanded the excavation carefully, exposing a cylindrical vent pipe, approximately 12 centimeters in diameter, made of stainless steel with light rust in several sections. The pipe had a metal mesh screen to block debris. This wasn't an old relic. This was a functional ventilation system. 30 minutes later, they uncovered the main entrance. A large horizontal metal plate covered by soil and tree roots. When cleaned, it revealed a hatch-style bunker door with hinges on one side and a lightly rusted metal handle. The surface was covered in fine cement dust, the same type found on Marcus's clothing. When the hatch was opened using a hydraulic lifting device, the smell that emerged was immediate and overwhelming. Musty. Ancient. Damp earth mixed with human waste and decay. A probe camera was lowered first. The footage showed a rectangular chamber with earthen walls reinforced by hand-cut pine planks. Low ceiling. Floor covered with rough, unfinished cement. After confirming safe oxygen levels and no toxic gases, the forensic team descended via a small metal ladder. The detention chamber measured approximately 2.3 meters long, 1.5 meters wide, and 1.9 meters high. Barely enough space for an average adult to stand upright. Impossible to stretch arms or walk more than a step. This was the first place Marcus Hale had described. The small cell where he couldn't fully extend his legs. On the right wall, 3 steel hooks were drilled deep into wooden planks, spaced about 30 centimeters apart, positioned at wrist height for a standing man. Below the hooks were horizontal scratch marks on the wood. Deep grooves where binding ropes had rubbed against the surface for months or years. In the left corner near the floor, a small metal pipe connected to the earthen surface behind it. The rudimentary ventilation system that had kept Marcus alive by providing minimal air circulation. Along the wall opposite the door, an uneven protruding cement patch with small flattened marks, suggesting this area had been broken out and then patched with hand-mixed cement. Evidence of modification over time. The forensic team found biological evidence immediately. Numerous short brown hairs stuck in wood crevices in the bunker corner. Size and color consistent with Marcus's hair from 2018. Preliminary DNA analysis confirmed they were his, not naturally shed but broken due to friction from repeated contact with the wood. On the cement floor, dust samples from 3 locations contained hydrated cement and limestone powder identical to samples from Marcus's clothing. He had been here for long enough that the minerals had embedded deeply into his clothes. On the wooden ceiling, scattered black spots. Carbon soot from gas lamps. The weak light source Marcus had described. Near the left wall, approximately 40 centimeters from the ground, a 1.1-meter iron chain nailed to a wooden hook. The other end showed signs of once having a padlock or ankle restraint. The chain was worn at the exact position corresponding to Marcus's left ankle, where his circular scars were located. The reinforcing wood planks weren't industrially produced. They were cut from local pine using manual tools, possibly a handsaw or axe. Uneven cuts. Varying thickness. Rough edges with adhering sawdust. Someone had built this entirely by hand. Materials experts examined the corrosion levels of metal components. Based on rust conditions of the steel hooks, bunker door hinges, and vent pipe, they estimated the bunker had been in continuous use for at least 5 to 7 years. Not abandoned. Active during the entire period Marcus was missing. Dr. Yamamoto, who'd conducted Marcus's medical examination, stood in the chamber and understood immediately. The ceiling height explained his spinal curvature. The floor space explained his muscle atrophy. The steel hooks explained his wrist scars. The chain explained his ankle scars. Every injury on Marcus's body corresponded to a feature in this chamber. "This is where he was held," she said quietly into her recorder. "This is the first location. Everything matches." But Marcus had described being transferred to a larger space. A second location. Which meant there was another bunker somewhere nearby. Marcus's testimony had provided specific details about the second location. Larger chamber. Higher ceiling. Wooden partition with a gap at the bottom. Water sounds very close. The geological team used the first bunker as a reference point and expanded their search pattern. LiDAR data showed the faint linear feature extending from Bunker 1 ran southwest for approximately 28 meters before terminating at another slight depression. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed a hollow zone at approximately 1.7 to 2 meters depth. Nearly rectangular in shape. Dimensions matching Marcus's estimates of the larger space. The excavation team moved to the new coordinates. When they cleared the surface vegetation, they found a second hatch, this one more developed than the first. Cylindrical vent pipe. Metal covering partially concealed by tree roots. This chamber had a homemade hatch made of thin steel sheet, hinges intact, handle functional. When opened, the rush of stale air was similar to Bunker 1 but with an additional organic decay odor. This space had been used more recently. The forensic team descended. Bunker 2 was significantly larger. Approximately 3.6 meters long, 2.2 meters wide, 2.1 meters high. A space where someone could lie down fully extended. Walk several steps. Stand without touching the ceiling. The walls were reinforced with pine wood and wide metal plates, sturdier construction than Bunker 1. The layout matched Marcus's description perfectly. Rectangular main chamber. Rough wooden partition on the west side. Secondary space behind the partition. Inside the main chamber, investigators found items that proved recent use. A 10-gallon plastic drum containing canned food, some with production dates from 2022 and 2023. The most recent date was April 2023. This bunker had been provisioned less than 2 years ago. An old brown flannel jacket hanging on a wooden hook. A 15-centimeter fixed-blade survival knife. A metal box containing 9 spent .22 LR casings. In the southwest corner, exactly where Marcus had described, a small gap between wall and floor. The fiber optic camera inserted through the gap revealed a small underground stream flowing beneath compacted stone. The water sound Marcus remembered so clearly. The forensic team collected biological evidence. 3 silver hairs, approximately 3 to 4 centimeters long, adhering to the wooden wall. Preliminary analysis showed they belonged to a male aged 55 to 75. DNA testing was run immediately. The sample was compared against databases. The match came back at 99.87% probability. The hair belonged to Rainer Maddox, a name that appeared in Yellowstone Ranger citations going back to 2009. The flannel jacket yielded more DNA. Skin cells and old sweat patches from the collar and inner sleeves. All matching Maddox. Soil samples from the jacket contained limestone and cement composition identical to Bunker 1, proving both chambers were built by the same person. On a makeshift wooden table, fingerprints were recovered from the metal box, the knife handle, and various surfaces. Comparison with FBI databases showed 3 prints matching exactly with Rainer Maddox, taken from a 1998 fingerprint record when he'd received an administrative penalty in Idaho. The spent .22 LR casings bore firing pin marks matching the characteristics of a .22 firearm Maddox had legally registered in the 1990s, later reported lost. The secondary space behind the wooden partition contained 5 meters of sisal rope, 3 depleted gas lanterns, a small steel pot with soot residue, 2 wooden planks with cut marks matching the tools used in Bunker 1, a plastic drum containing ash, charcoal fragments, and remnants of 40-pound cement bags with batch numbers from 2019, the period when Marcus was still missing. Analysis of Bunker 2's floor showed that part of the cement had been poured approximately 2 to 3 years prior, around 2021 to 2022. Maddox had continued maintaining this structure while Marcus was captive. The metal hatch showed fresh grinding marks on the hinges. Someone had recently adjusted it to open more smoothly. Analysis of metal filings matched the alloy composition of a handheld tool set confiscated from Maddox in 2012 during a public land trespass incident. Every piece of evidence pointed to one person. Rainer Maddox had built these bunkers. He'd maintained them for years. He'd held Marcus Hale in them for over 6 years. The case against Maddox was no longer theoretical. It was concrete, documented, and overwhelming. On October 30, 2024, federal prosecutors authorized the issuance of an arrest warrant. While forensic teams processed evidence from the bunkers, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit compiled everything known about Rainer Maddox into a comprehensive profile. Maddox, aged 68 at the time of the investigation, had lived on the fringes of society for most of his adult life. Born in 1956 in rural Idaho, he'd worked various manual labor jobs: logging, basic construction, seasonal work in national forests. No stable employment history after 1995. No fixed address since 2005. He'd been cited by rangers and Forest Service personnel multiple times over 2 decades. 2009, erected an unauthorized pine structure in Bridger-Teton National Forest. Ordered to dismantle it. 2010, discovered living in a self-built underground shelter on public land. Evicted. 2012, cited for digging a cement-reinforced pit near Mammoth Hot Springs in Yellowstone. Rangers documented the incident but deemed it eccentric behavior rather than criminal. 2013, minor altercation with rangers over private-public land boundaries near the Shoshone National Forest border. 2015, last official citation for unauthorized camping and resisting orders to leave a conservation area. After 2015, Maddox essentially disappeared from official records. No tax filings. No credit card transactions. No vehicle registrations. He'd gone completely off-grid. Witness reports placed him living intermittently in the forests along Yellowstone's southern boundary, moving between Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. Always alone. always avoiding contact. His purchasing habits, traced through old records, showed a pattern: cement bags, steel pipes, metal hinges, hand tools, gas lamps. All materials found in the bunkers. The BAU profile painted a clear picture. Maddox possessed the patience for long-term planning. Building the bunkers would have taken months, possibly years. He had to excavate in secrecy, transport materials without detection, and construct reinforced chambers that wouldn't collapse. He had practical knowledge of geology and manual construction. He understood soil compaction, collapse prevention, and how to select locations that minimized exposure risk. He valued control and isolation. The bunker design showed meticulous attention to restricting movement, controlling light, managing every aspect of the captive's existence. He had deep familiarity with Yellowstone's terrain and ranger patrol patterns. He knew the low-traffic areas, the blind spots in coverage, the schedules that would allow him to move undetected. And most disturbingly, he showed characteristics consistent with someone who'd planned this for years before Marcus Hale ever walked down that trail. The bunkers weren't built in response to opportunity. They were built in anticipation. Maddox had been waiting for someone. On October 31, 2024, federal forces launched a coordinated manhunt covering the national forest areas bordering Yellowstone where Maddox was believed to be hiding. Thermal drones deployed at dawn, scanning the dense southwestern forest. In 6 hours of continuous operation, 3 heat signatures were detected. 2 were animals. The third was human, moving slowly westward about 1.2 miles from Bunker 2. The heat signature matched human walking patterns, heading toward Shoshone National Forest, an area where Maddox had been sighted years earlier. K-9 units deployed immediately. The tracking dogs picked up human scent mixed with distinctive soil and cement smells, the same minerals found in the bunkers. But after about 600 meters, the scent dispersed. Maddox had used fresh pine needles to create false trails, dragging bundles in multiple directions. He knew anti-tracking tactics. Ground teams shifted to footprint analysis. On muddy sections, they found clear boot prints. Old military boots, the same type that had left impressions in Bunker 1. The prints showed slow, steady movement. No running. No panic. Maddox was being methodical even in flight. Then the prints stopped abruptly. Metal detector sweeps revealed why: a thin tripwire connected to a shotgun shell trap hidden in brush. Handmade, survivalist style. SWAT teams neutralized the trap and continued pursuit. A small ash pile was discovered, still warm at the center. Food scraps and tin cans from the same production batch as those in Bunker 2. Maddox had stopped to cook within the last 24 hours. The pursuit team determined Maddox was heading toward Shoshone Forest border, where terrain became more rugged and canopy more dense. Perfect for evasion. SWAT established blockades on 3 high-probability routes. K-9 units redeployed at branch intersections. Thermal drones detected the heat signature again, approaching the Shoshone boundary. Temperature fluctuations indicated someone moving under thick canopy with occasional rests. Movement rhythm consistent with an older individual carrying heavy gear. At 1,740 hours, a Forest Service patrol reported sighting a temporary camp trace. Stake holes pulled from the ground, no more than 12 hours old. Maddox was moving continuously, but had wilderness survival skills for quick setup and cleanup. By 1815 hours, K-9 units picked up Maddox's scent again, now stronger and steadier due to shifting winds. The pursuit was closing to under 1 mile. Terrain data showed Maddox was entering Shoshone, where dozens of natural hiding paths and cliff systems would make pursuit exponentially harder. Capture forces tightened the encirclement, coordinating aerial drones with ground K-9 units. By sunset, they'd confirmed Maddox had crossed into Shoshone National Forest. The hunt entered its most complex phase. At dawn on November 1st, a Forest Service team following faint tree bark scratches and broken branches discovered something hidden in a natural rock depression. A small wooden cabin, nearly invisible against the forest background, camouflaged with pine branches, moss layers, and pressed bark sheets. The cabin sat in a depression shielded by large tree canopies, creating limited visibility from aerial observation. A clearing in front created a natural approach that any tactical team would have to cross. As scouts moved closer, they identified tripwires. The first ran from the cabin door to a wooden stake. Shotgun shell trap configuration. SWAT cordoned the area and deployed bomb squad personnel to disarm the wire. When the first wire was neutralized, a secondary trap triggered. A pressure-activated device under leaf litter that launched small metal fragments. No injuries, but it confirmed Maddox had prepared multiple defensive layers. Then the cabin door opened. Rainer Maddox appeared, holding an old hunting rifle. He fired one shot into the treetops, a warning, not an attempt to hit anyone. SWAT withdrew to covered positions behind boulders. A negotiator used a bullhorn to call for surrender. Maddox slammed the door and barricaded from inside. Over the next 40 minutes, SWAT cleared additional traps around the cabin perimeter, a shallow camouflaged pit, 2 spring-loaded spike traps, and a wire-triggered knife trap. All showed Maddox's thorough preparation and understanding that he'd eventually be found. Once the approach was cleared, SWAT deployed a breacher team with a hydraulic door ram and flashbang grenades. When the ram activated, Maddox fired one more shot from inside, but the bullet penetrated wood and lost momentum. Flashbangs were thrown through the door gap, creating blinding light and disorienting noise. SWAT rushed in. Maddox was subdued in under 12 seconds. The rifle was seized from his hands. He offered no resistance once restrained. Inside the cabin, forensic teams found a crude wooden bed, small stove, dry goods container, and a work table. On the table, an old Yellowstone map marked with red pen symbols. Many marks corresponded exactly to Bunker 1 and 2 locations. Under the bed, 3 survival knives, an axe, rope, nails, and metal scraps similar to restraint hooks from Bunker 1. In the cabin corner, 3 small steel pipes matching bunker ventilation tubes, and a partially torn 40-pound cement bag. A handheld tool set with clear fingerprints on the handles, including a hand drill, small sledgehammer, and large clamp, all matching construction details from the bunkers. Near the cabin, a large container hidden under bark, filled with old items including jackets, gloves, and metal hinges, all matching materials from the bunker sites. Rainer Maddox's arrest in the camouflaged cabin, surrounded by tools and materials directly linked to Marcus Hale's imprisonment, provided the final physical evidence needed. The case was complete. Rainer Maddox was transferred to a federal detention facility in Jackson, Wyoming. From the first moment of interrogation, he invoked his right to remain silent. He said nothing. No explanations. No justifications. No denials. When investigators listed the charges, kidnapping a federal employee, prolonged confinement, torture causing serious injury, assault on federal officers, he showed no emotional reaction. Just a blank stare and continued silence. His silence didn't matter. The evidence spoke for him. Marcus's forensic testimony matched the physical characteristics of both bunkers. His descriptions of dim lighting corresponded to wiring and bulb sockets found in the chambers. His descriptions of steel hooks matched their exact positions. His account of being transferred through a narrow passage matched the connecting tunnel that had been filled but still showed signs of use. Marcus couldn't have fabricated memories this precise without having been physically present. The forensic team cross-referenced every detail. Cement from the cabin matched cement from Bunker 2. Yellowstone maps with marked locations proved Maddox had monitored and documented the sites. Tools with his fingerprints matched cuts and abrasions on wood and metal in both bunkers. DNA evidence was irrefutable. 3 silver hairs in Bunker 2 matched Maddox at 99.87% probability. Fingerprints on metal boxes, casings, knife handles, and hinges all matched his biometric records. Firing pin impressions on .22 LR casings matched the rifle he'd registered decades ago. Minerals on Marcus's clothing matched minerals from both bunkers and the cabin, forming a continuous chain that couldn't occur naturally. Construction experts confirmed bunkers 1 and 2 were built by the same person. Wood placement techniques, cutting angles, layered cement pouring methods, and steel hook attachment all exhibited consistent characteristics. The BAU psychologist completed the profile, cross-referencing Maddox's behavior throughout arrest, bunker construction, and anti-pursuit preparations. He displayed control obsession, reclusive habits, and long-term planning ability, all matching criteria from the original behavioral analysis. Geologists confirmed the bunker locations reflected deep understanding of Yellowstone stratigraphy, knowing how to choose stable ground and avoid subsidence risks. When the comprehensive report was completed, the case file against Maddox reached full legal threshold. Marcus's testimony was absolutely reinforced by physical evidence, DNA, fingerprints, and construction signatures. Maddox's silence couldn't break the chain of proof. The federal trial of Rainer Maddox opened at the U.S. District Court for Wyoming in spring 2025. Security was heightened due to the severity of the case and the victim's prolonged captivity. The indictment listed 4 primary charge groups: federal kidnapping of a National Park Service employee, unlawful prolonged confinement and deprivation of liberty, torture causing serious injury, assault on federal officers during escape and resistance. Kidnapping a federal employee while on duty elevated the case to federal jurisdiction, with minimum sentencing exceeding multiple decades. In the prosecution's opening, federal prosecutors emphasized this wasn't just personal violence but a series of crimes prepared, maintained, and concealed over years, demonstrating high danger and premeditated intent. Evidence presented included 3D models reconstructing both underground bunkers at actual measured dimensions. The jury could visualize the cramped spaces, rough wooden walls, steel restraint hooks, and ventilation pipes. The prosecution presented a 6-year forensic timeline based on Marcus's testimony cross-referenced with physical evidence. Cement hydration signs indicating bunker maintenance in 2021. Cement bags from batches matching those in the cabin. Food cans with 2022 to 2023 production dates proving recent provisioning. Fresh abrasion marks on hatch hinges confirming activity near the time Marcus was found. When describing the confinement, prosecutors focused on forensic medical evidence. Circular scars on Marcus's wrists matching chain length in Bunker 1. Long-term muscle atrophy consistent with restricted movement in confined space. Heightened light sensitivity reflecting prolonged dark environment. Medical analyses proving cyclical starvation over years. These elements solidified the torture charge, which required clear long-term evidence. Maddox maintained silence throughout the trial. His appointed counsel attempted to argue lack of direct eyewitnesses seeing Maddox commit the confinement. But the prosecution countered with the comprehensiveness and interconnectivity of evidence. Maddox's DNA in Bunker 2 on hair and skin cells. His fingerprints on casings, tools, hinges, metal boxes. Firing pin marks matching his registered rifle. The cabin map marked at exact bunker locations. Shoe wear patterns matching his old military boots. When presented to the jury, this evidence formed an undeniable link between Maddox and the entire confinement structure. Geologists testified that bunker site selection required deep familiarity with Yellowstone stratigraphy, knowledge of stable ground and avoidance of subsidence risks. Hand construction experts described wall collapse prevention techniques in both bunkers as unified to the degree of a technical fingerprint, matching unauthorized structures Maddox had built previously. The BAU psychologist testified that Maddox's behavioral profile, control obsession, spatial fixation, social isolation, long-term forest habitation, perfectly fit a long-term confinement perpetrator. When Marcus appeared in court as a witness, he confirmed what he remembered: sounds, lighting, spatial features, items, daily cycles. He made no direct accusations, just described his experience. The prosecution used his testimony as a reference pillar, cross-referencing each description with physical evidence, showing near-perfect alignment. After 3 weeks of trial, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. The presiding judge read the sentence in absolute courtroom silence. Rainer Maddox was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for federal kidnapping and prolonged confinement. An additional 30 years for torture, unauthorized construction on federal land, and armed assault on pursuing forces. The sentence was regarded as maximum but entirely appropriate for the case's severity. Marcus Hale is currently receiving treatment at a specialized recovery center under the Department of Veterans Affairs, in a program dedicated to victims of prolonged confinement. His physical condition has stabilized. After months of gradual nutritional supplementation, he's regained weight. His muscles are slowly recovering, though they remain weak from years of atrophy. Psychologically, Marcus is undergoing treatment for complex trauma. Sessions address sleep disorders, sensory retraining, and time reorientation. He still struggles in dark spaces. Metallic clanging sounds trigger avoidance reactions. Sometimes he loses sense of time for minutes at a stretch. But doctors note clear progress. Marcus has begun taking short walks on hospital grounds. He tolerates natural light for longer periods. He talks more with his family. He's not ready to return to work, but the Park Service continues full support, financial security, lifelong therapy access, and phased reintegration programs when he's ready. The road to full recovery will take years. Some wounds may never completely heal. But Marcus Hale survived. Against impossible odds, he survived. The Marcus Hale case shook the entire Yellowstone system and the National Park Service as a whole. 3 months after Maddox's conviction, Yellowstone issued a comprehensive reform package for remote patrol procedures. All backcountry patrol rangers now carry dual-layer GPS devices. 1 active unit transmitting periodic signals, 1 passive satellite device that can be pinged from headquarters at any time. Body cameras are mandatory for solo patrols, maintaining continuous footage even when radio signals are lost. Previously solo-patrolled high-risk areas now require double-team models. At least 2 rangers together in deep regions, especially areas with known radio dead zones. An AI-based alert system monitors radio data. If a ranger's signal drops suddenly for even a short period, headquarters receives automatic notification and activates early response protocol instead of waiting until shift end. These reforms represent a major turning point in Yellowstone's operational history, partly due to the park's vast size and partly because Marcus's case exposed critical vulnerabilities in old procedures. At the federal level, the FBI announced reopening at least 8 old missing persons cases in national parks over the past 20 years. Cases previously concluded as accidents, but with unexplained elements, especially in areas with geological conditions suitable for underground construction. Though no evidence links Maddox to other cases, Marcus's ordeal prompted authorities to reassess the possibility of other lone perpetrators with similar capabilities. Federal investigation teams were dispatched to multiple parks to re-examine geological maps, satellite imagery, and old trail camera footage using LiDAR technology to detect anomalies similar to Maddox's bunkers. For the Park Service, the case is viewed as profound loss but also necessary awakening. Marcus became a symbol of resilience for remote rangers, those facing risks in environments most visitors never see. Yellowstone management officially incorporated the case into new ranger training programs, using it as an example of the importance of cross-checking signals, vigilance toward unusual forest behavior, and understanding how terrain can be exploited for criminal purposes. The case's impact extends beyond Yellowstone. Major parks like Yosemite, Glacier, and Grand Teton updated patrol procedures, adding training on recognizing underground structure signs and confined space escape skills. Though Marcus has a long road to full recovery, his survival and Maddox's conviction mark the closure of one of the most disturbing cases in National Park Service history. With widespread reforms implemented and a fundamental shift in patrol safety mindset, the case didn't just conclude. It reshaped how the Park Service protects those who protect America's wilderness. The story of Marcus Hale isn't just about one man's nightmare and another man's evil. It's a reflection of vulnerabilities in systems we assume are foolproof. Marcus disappeared because of a minor radio failure in terrain that interfered with signals. That failure, combined with Maddox's understanding of patrol schedules and search patterns, created a window of opportunity that should never have existed. The dual-layer GPS, body cameras, and automated alert systems now deployed by Yellowstone are acknowledgments that technology is only useful when deployed redundantly. One point of failure can mean the difference between rescue and 6 years of captivity. Maddox's ability to live detached from society while building underground prisons highlights another uncomfortable truth. In a country as vast as the United States, With millions of acres of wilderness, it's possible for someone to become functionally invisible. No fixed address. No digital footprint. No social connections. Just knowledge of terrain and the patience to wait. The citations Maddox received over the years, building unauthorized structures, digging cement-reinforced pits, resisting ranger orders, were dismissed as eccentric behavior. Harmless survivalist tendencies. No one connected the pattern. No one saw the progression from building shelters for himself to building prisons for others. It's a reminder that antisocial behavior, especially when combined with practical skills and deep wilderness knowledge, deserves closer scrutiny than it often receives. Marcus's recovery journey underscores the critical importance of mental health support systems. PTSD, depression, and chronic stress from trauma aren't abstract concepts. They're real, physiological changes in the brain that require professional treatment, family support, and time. The United States has made progress in recognizing these needs, particularly for veterans and first responders. Marcus's case extends that recognition to park rangers and others who work in isolated, high-risk environments. If there's one greatest lesson from Marcus Hale's story, it's this. Safety is never something to take for granted. Those who protect communities, whether in urban environments or wilderness settings, need comprehensive support systems, redundant safety protocols, and organizational cultures that prioritize their well-being as highly as the missions they serve. Every individual, whether in cities or forests, must maintain connections, share routes and plans with others, check equipment rigorously, and stay alert to surrounding anomalies. Marcus's story proves that sometimes just a small habit can be the difference between disappearance and survival. Early signal checks. Traveling in pairs when possible. Immediate reporting of anything unusual, even something as seemingly minor as a flashing light in the forest. These aren't paranoid precautions. They're rational responses to real risks. And for those who work in isolation, in places where help might be hours or days away, these habits aren't optional. They're essential. On a cold morning in January 2026, Marcus Hale stood at the edge of Beckler Canyon for the first time since August 29, 2018. He wasn't alone. His brother stood beside him. His therapist had approved the visit as part of his recovery process, a way to reclaim the place that had been stolen from him. Marcus looked out over the forest where he'd disappeared. The same pine trees. The same volcanic rock formations. The same steam rising from distant geothermal features. Somewhere below that forest floor, now sealed and marked as a crime scene, were the two bunkers where he'd spent 2,190 days. Marcus didn't go near them. He didn't need to. He'd already reclaimed what mattered most. His name. His life. His future. Rainer Maddox had taken 6 years from him. 6 years that Marcus would never get back. Years of darkness, pain, and absolute isolation. But Maddox hadn't broken him. Marcus had survived. He'd found his way back to the surface, both literally and metaphorically. He'd testified. He'd helped ensure that Maddox would never hurt anyone else. And slowly, carefully, he was rebuilding the life that had been interrupted on that August afternoon in 2018. The forest was still beautiful. The wilderness still worth protecting. But Marcus understood now, in a way few people ever would, that beauty and danger aren't opposites. They coexist. And the line between safety and catastrophe can be as thin as a single moment of inattention, a single decision to investigate something unusual, a single step off a known trail. Marcus turned away from the canyon and walked back toward the parking area, his brother beside him. Behind them, Yellowstone stretched out in all its vast, magnificent, dangerous beauty. A place of wonder. A place of healing. And for Marcus Hale, a place he would one day, when he was ready, return to serve again. Because that's what rangers do. They fall. They get back up. They return to protect the wild places and the people who love them. Marcus's story isn't over. It's just beginning again. The case of Marcus Hale and Rainer Maddox stands as one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in National Park Service history. It revealed how someone can vanish in one of America's most monitored wilderness areas. It showed how a single individual with patience, wilderness knowledge, and manual construction skills can create an invisible prison that holds a man for over 6 years. It exposed systemic vulnerabilities in search and rescue protocols, communication systems, and patrol procedures. But it also demonstrated something else: human resilience, the capacity to survive the unsurvivable, the strength to rebuild after unimaginable trauma, and the importance of systems that refuse to give up on the missing, even when all evidence suggests they're gone forever. Marcus Hale was found because investigators believed his story when he reappeared. They took his fragmented memories seriously. They cross-referenced his testimony with new technology and old evidence. They didn't dismiss what seemed impossible. They kept searching until they found the truth. If you found this story compelling, if it made you think about safety, resilience, and the hidden dangers that exist even in places we consider safe, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. There are more stories like this. Stories from the front lines of reality where ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances. Stories that need to be told, remembered, and learned from. Marcus Hale's name is no longer on the memorial wall at Beckler Station. It's been moved to the active duty roster. Because against all odds, despite 6 years in darkness, despite a captor who planned to keep him forever, Marcus came back. And that's a story worth remembering. Thank you for watching. Stay safe out there. And if you're heading into the wilderness, tell someone where you're going, check your equipment twice, and trust your instincts when something feels wrong. It might save your life.